Okay, welcome back. Let's talk about the unemployment rate. So, the unemployment rate is the one that's often quoted in the paper. You know, you hear it on the news, the newspaper there. I gave my age away, right? But this is the one that you'll see show up in your Twitter feed. It's in social media, it's on the news, it's in the press releases from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The unemployment rate is the most commonly quoted statistic about employment and unemployment. The unemployment rate is basically the number of people who are unemployed over the number of people employed plus unemployed. Now, the other way to think about this is the labor force, right? So the number of people employed plus the number of people unemployed, this is the labor force. So the labor force are people working and people who are unemployed. That is, they want to be working. Because remember, one of the definitions, right, one of the characteristics to be unemployed is that you have to be looking for work, right? You're not working, but you're actively seeking work. So, the labor force is made up of people who are working and people who want to be working but can't find work. And so the unemployment rate is, just to simplify, the number of people unemployed over the labor force. Right? And the labor force is made up of people who are working and people who want to be working but can't find work. Right? So, here's a little chart to help you see it. Civilian population, right? That's people 16 years of age and older who are so not in the military. That's one thing. People in the military do not count in the traditional civilian unemployment rate. So when you look at the stats, most of the time you're looking at the civilian unemployment rate, so military are not excluded. So there's the labor force, that's the employed plus the unemployed, that's what we just talked about. And then there's the not in the labor force, right? So who's not in the labor force? Well, full-time students. Who else is in it? Retired people. Stay-at-home parents, right? People who just choose not to work. If you're not actively looking for work and you're not actively looking, then you're not in the labor force. Right? So we'll talk about that in a second. Some of the people who are not counted, that is a problem, or that it represents sort of an error or a skew in the unemployment rate. But here's where you can see the unemployment rate, right, is the proportion of the unemployed people over to the labor force. But just notice that there are people, and this is where my initial comment about being unemployed is more than just not working. There are lots of people who are not working, right, who are not in the labor force. So, I mean, it's funny, if being unemployed was simply not working, then many people would aspire to be unemployed someday, right? I mean, retirement is just the idea that you can work enough and save some money during your prime working years so as to have a period of time later in life when you don't have to work and you can, enjoy life. So, at any rate, when we talk about unemployment, this is what we mean. Unemployed divided by the labor force. Now, our unemployment rate calculation is not perfect. Right? There are two main categories of people who don't show up in there, and I want to talk about those because you should be familiar with these two problems, right, or complications with the unemployment rate. One is that the unemployment rate, as we understand it, does not include people who are underemployed. Right, so remember our unemployment rate, use a big U for that. So the number who are unemployed. Actually, let's call that the unemployment rate. Hang on, let's fix this. Oops. The unemployment rate, right, is the number unemployed divided by the labor force. But to be unemployed, you have to be not working. And so when people are underemployed, remember we talked about, I used an example of the college student in frictional unemployment because they haven't yet found that job. So you graduate with a degree in pick whatever. You can have a degree in English, you have a degree in accounting, you have a degree in economics. There we go. Now we're talking. And so you're well equipped for many jobs. You just haven't landed, the professional job that uses those skills yet. And so you are looking, right? But in the meantime, you still work 25 or 30 hours a week at Wegmans, right? As a cashier, as a bagger, as a helping hands person, whatever you did in high school and on the breaks, through college, you still keep doing it. You get some hours, you get some shifts in order to make some money while you polish your resume and go on interviews and try to get hooked up with your permanent employment. That makes the best use of your new skills and your degree and your training. So, but that job working 25 or 30 hours a week at Wegmans, maybe that's not what you aspire to do, right? Maybe that's not the best use of your new degree, right? Your new college degree. So you are underemployed. You are not matched up with that productive, optimal job based on your skills and your interests. But you are in fact working, and if you are in fact working, if you're picking up a few shifts, even 1 or 2 shifts a week at Wegmans, moving the carts, can you be unemployed? No, because according to the definition for unemployment, you have to be not working and actively seeking work. So people who have part-time jobs, or pick up, a few shifts while they look for their regular, full-time professional job, or it doesn't have to be a professional job, right? Whatever it is, maybe I'm an HVAC technician, right? But I've moved to a new area. I haven't yet found a company that's hiring, and needs my particular, unique skills. I haven't gotten matched up yet. And if for a while I take a job at the 7-Eleven, right, just to make a little money until I find my HVAC tech job, I'm underemployed. So that's one way that the unemployment rate does not accurately reflect maybe the underlying level of unemployment or problems in employment. So if I just got my college degree and I haven't gotten matched up, or if I have my certification, and I have my associate's degree in HVAC, and I don't yet have that job, and I'm working at Wegmans, I may be underemployed. But I don't show up in the unemployment rate because I am technically employed, even part-time. If I work just a few hours a week, I'm employed, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So that's one error. So in a sense, think about this. Would the unemployment rate as it's given, would that tend to overstate or understate the true level of employment problems in the economy? Well, to the extent that there are underemployed workers, the stated rate, the unemployment rate as we calculate it, could understate the real underlying problems in the labor market. The other way that there can be that it can be sort of deceiving, right, or misrepresent the labor market is in the case of discouraged workers. So discouraged workers are people who lost a job, let's say. Let's say that you worked in textiles, in Tennessee, and your plant closed up, and so you had to try to find another job, and so you looked for another job, and you and your family have lived in the same town, for a long, long time. Maybe your spouse is still employed there. Your kids have, they go to school. They have a social network. You're not ready to sort of pick up and try to move somewhere else. You don't know where you'd go. Your family, your connections are all in this one town. But the main textile plant closed, and so lots of people are out of work. And so the handful of places that could hire someone already have, and so you keep banging doors, you keep reading the want ads, you knock on doors, you try to find a job, but you don't find anything. And so week after week, you keep trying. There are no jobs in this town. So are you going to go out and pound the pavement and search the want ads, week after week after week when nothing has changed? Well, sometimes people don't, right? They stop looking. Now, it's not that they don't ever want to work again. They do, but they recognize that, look, until something new comes into town, until a new enterprise opens up, until there's some, larger change, maybe structural change in the economy in their town, there are no jobs. And so they stop looking. And again, it's not necessarily because they're just lazy. It's because there's nothing out there, and they made a rational calculation that there's no use in looking for jobs right now because there are no jobs to be had. And when there are jobs to be had, they may be first in line, right, to try to apply for them. But according to our definition of being unemployed, you have to be currently not working and actively seeking work. And so the way the Bureau of Labor Statistics collects this information used to be all through phone surveys. Now it's through phone surveys and I think a couple other, more modern ways of collecting this information from randomized households. When they collect this information and they essentially ask, have you looked for work in the last 2 weeks? And you say no, then you're not unemployed. According to the definition, you are not unemployed. So discouraged workers basically fall out of the labor force, right? Because they're not employed, but they end up being not classified as unemployed. As they fall out of the labor force, that can skew the unemployment rate down. We may, conceptually, we may want to count these people as unemployed, right? These are people who ultimately would like to be working, want to be working, need to be working, can't find work. But because they've actively, because they haven't knocked on any doors, submitted any resumes, done anything in the last 2 weeks, they're not counted as unemployed. So they fall out, and that's where you people and analysts and people look at the unemployment figures and they talk about this and say, well, an unemployment rate. During a long recession, sometimes this happens. The unemployment rate slowly goes down just a little bit. And some of that is because people are finding jobs. Maybe as there's a beginning of a recovery, some more people are finding jobs. But sometimes the unemployment rate slips just a little bit as discouraged workers fall out of the labor force and are no longer counted. Now, remember, because the unemployment rate is the number unemployed over the labor force. And so as you slip out of that, that affects the ratio, right? And that makes it a little bit smaller. So there you go. Those are two potential errors or two problems that you should be aware of in the reported unemployment rate. There's no easy fix for this. Just be aware that either one of these can affect the numbers that we get. All right, there is the, labor force participation rate. We already talked about this. I want to show you, now I'll put this in the links, the place that you go to look for this information. One is the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, so it's bls.org. You can find lots of great unemployment rate data there. Lots of the press releases every couple weeks when new figures come out. The other place that you can look for data, and this is not just unemployment rate data, but all kinds of, they have hundreds, if not thousands of series, is at FRED. So this is the Federal Reserve Economic Database, and it's run by the St. Louis Fed. But, and I'll post a link for this as well. If you go to FRED, you can search all sorts of things. And so, for example, down here I have Civ, this part to this link right here, Civ part. This is for the civilian labor force participation rate. That's one of the many things. You also find measures of unemployment there. I'll post some links for those so that you can go poke around. And then for the assignment section, I'll have you actually collect a little data from these websites as well. So that's everything except this one misunderstanding that I want to highlight. Someone a little while back had tweeted this because it illustrates what we it illustrates how important it is to understand what these data convey and what the numbers that we're reporting are. And so somebody has written an article, they published it on medium.com, and it was sort of a rant about how the the official unemployment rate was 3.8%, but they did a little digging and they found out that 37% of the U.S. was unemployed. And then they went on this rant about how, this is ridiculous and the government is covering stuff up, and this 3.8% rate cannot possibly be right. This is all about misunderstanding what these data mean and what these stated rates are. So the official unemployment rate, this is the one we've talked about, right? The number unemployed over the labor force. Now, the labor force, that's made up of people who are working and people who are unemployed. But there are a whole bunch of people who are not in the labor force. You know how many people are not in the labor force? Well, something around 37% of the population, perhaps. So they're not unemployed. It just means that they are not working or actively seeking work, right? So they're not unemployed according to the official Bureau of Labor Statistics definition. Maybe somebody's just common colloquial definition, they're not working, and if you said, therefore, that they're unemployed. But these people are not part of the labor force. They could be full-time students, they could be stay-at-home parents, they could be retired people, they could be independently wealthy and just don't want to work, or choose not to work, I should say. Whatever it is, these are people who are not part of the labor force. So just understand that difference. Sometimes you'll see people misunderstand what the data are trying to report. So there you go. That wraps up our section on unemployment. Please follow